Welcome to Sterling Visionary Voices, the podcast dedicated to bringing you diverse, innovative leadership insights and actionable strategies for success. Join hosts Laura McNeil and Bob Medeiros as they explore the art and science of role model leadership through thought-provoking conversations with real professionals. Whether you're a seasoned leader or aspiring to excellence, Sterling Visionary Voices is your guide to navigating the complexities of your leadership journey.
In 1987, the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Improvement Act was passed after Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Commerce, Malcolm Baldrige, raised concerns associated with ongoing competitive pressures from Japanese auto manufacturers and their growing expertise in quality operations and manufacturing techniques. At this time, Japanese manufacturing was no longer solely an offshore activity. The Japanese were starting to establish manufacturing plants on U.S. soil. The competition was coming front and center, face to face. With us for this episode is Gordon Klein. He's the CEO and president of Reflect Excellence, LLC. Gordon has agreed to break down some of the key components of this National Quality Improvement Act for us. These practices are the core components of the Baldrige and the Sterling models, which have been used by Boeing, Starbucks, and other organizations that were on the brink of bankruptcy in turning things around in a very short time frame. In fact, I'm aware of one situation where a hospital in upstate New York had reversed years of bankruptcy in an 8-month time frame post-adoption of these models. It's the only framework that is organizational-wide. It transcends all industries and is capable of transcending time and competitive pressures. The system is tangible, it's real, and it's based on the mastery of 2 acronyms, ADLI, ADLI, and LETCI, LETC. So Gordon, this is where I'm going to turn it over to you. Can you kick off our conversation today with a little bit of a background on what ADLI and LETCI stand for and their use within an organization?
Certainly, Laura. This is a topic that I get excited about, so please slow me down if I start going too fast or getting too animated. Like you, I've been working with the Baldrige framework for years, and I've learned many things from my experience. The 2 acronyms that you mentioned, and the skill set and the success that goes with applying those 2 acronyms is really, really the biggest bang for the buck for everything I've done with the Sterling Council over the last 10 years. The acronym ADLI stands for Approach, Deployment, Learning, and Integration. I like to say ADLI is attitude, and I think it is an attitude towards approaching just about any situation. Success is success if you've measured it and you can see that you've met your goal. LETCI is the consistent method to looking at what you're measuring and how you're measuring it. And it stands for level, L-E, trends, T, comparisons, C, and integration, which is the same integration that I mentioned in the ADLI. And then we often throw in G for gaps. We say LETCI plus G, because sometimes you realize that here's something I should have been keeping track of that I haven't been keeping track of. So let me talk about what I mean when I say that ADLI is attitude. ADLI is all about, if you want to do something, be successful, and continue to be successful. To have sustained success, you need to have an approach. An approach is something that you do that's documented, that's systematic, that you do every day or every week or every month. You are continually doing it. Whatever your goal is, whether it's to be a great leader, you need to have a leadership approach. If it's to be a great husband, you need to have a marriage approach. If it's to be a great student, you might need to have a studying approach. So having an approach is the first part of it. Now, I will say I'm a big believer in Gall's law, which is a law that we use I was once in the IT industry. We use a lot in systems development. And Gall's law says that every successful complex system grew out of a successful simple system. So if you're just thinking about ADLI, you're thinking about approach, start with a simple approach. But really doing things, talking about things, measuring things as approaches moves you forward so much better than anything else. It's also a wonderful communication tool. I used to supervise, I was chief financial officer for an organization. I supervised a number of managers, and I did their annual evaluation like we all do annual evaluations. I got the printed form and I checked off whether they dressed nice and smelled nice and looked nice and showed up on time. And that was neither meaningful to them or me or really the organization. So I stopped. I said, okay, here's your role. You are the budget manager. What is your approach for developing the budget? And we would discuss, and I would evaluate him on whether there was an documented, planned, systematic approach. My next question would be, is everyone on your team following that approach? That takes it from the A to the D. Because just because a manager has an approach, if his staff's not following it, is it really an approach? And if he hasn't shared it with, say, the main budget office or our managers that we're trying to get their budgets passed. So the first part is develop an approach. And like I said, start simple. The next D is for deployment. Is it deployed? Is it shared with who you need to share it with? And I shared with my staff before I started talking to them about ADLI, what ADLI was, and the fact that I was going to start doing this. Now, do you think those conversations I had with my manager became more meaningful when that was what I was asking and that's what we were evaluating his success on?
I think it's a very valid point. You can have an approach, but if the approach is not deployed effectively to the stakeholders that need to buy into your approach to help you make your approach a success, then it's falling short and there's waste in the system and it's not fully optimized. It's a really good point.
And I don't care what approach you're developing, whether it is a leadership approach in managing senior level staff or managing your board of directors, or if it's a studying approach as a freshman in college. You are never alone in this world at some point in time. And if you have a particular studying schedule and you need quiet time and you don't share that fact with your roommate, your approach is doomed for failure. Which brings us to the next. Well, go ahead, Laura. I can see you're thinking.
I actually think that deployment also has to have an element of accountability to it. By deploying your approach to the other people in your organization or the other people in your family or group, you're giving them a sense of accountability for assisting you in complying with that approach or supporting what the approach is designed to develop and deliver. If you don't have accountability for the deployment, you still have a potential for it to fall flat. So in deployment, there also needs to be a sense of a shared accountability, which is the whole point in deploying the approach. You're deploying it to drive that shared accountability to the other members within your group.
You are absolutely right, Laura. It's an excellent point. Following along on those examples, just telling your roommate that you need quiet time from 6 to 7 is not deployment. Telling your roommate you need quiet time from 6 to 7 and your roommate respects it. If their portion of your plan is conducted and you get the quiet time, that is deployment. But that brings us to the next letter in the acronym, learning. And I'm going to stick with the student example, if that's all right, Laura, because I've laid out an approach to how I'm going to get my studying done and get my papers written and continuously get A's and graduate at the top of my class. Doesn't mean that that approach I laid out my first day as a freshman is the best approach. It's the best approach I could lay out on that day. But as we implement it and as we deploy it, some things will work, some things will not. And we're going to talk about those a little more when we start talking about the LETCI acronym. But the fact of the matter is, just because I've laid out an approach and I've shared it with my professors, I've shared it with my roommates, I've shared it with my family, and I've programmed quiet time into my phone so my phone won't ring during that time. And I did all of those good things. Doesn't mean that all those good things was the optimal. We need to regularly build in a review for how the approach is working. Is the approach continually getting me towards the goal I want? Am I getting those A's with little stress and reasonable activity? And it may be that 6 to 7, even though my roommate is being quiet 6 to 7, it may be that that's really annoying my roommate because that's normally their time to talk to their mom and they'd rather be quiet from 7 to 8. And if we have that discussion as we review the approach, then we can make the approach better. And I can see thoughts behind your eyeballs there, Laura. You're thinking.
I like to look at the L while we've defined the A to be approach, the D to be deployment, the L to be learning. I believe the L also serves two purposes, listening and learning. In the example you just provided, maybe you've asked for 6 to 7, but you'll find that 7 to 8 works better in the microcosm in which your group thrives. It's a better shared time frame, 7 to 8. You have to be able to listen and learn, and that's true from senior leadership all the way down to frontline staff. There needs to be listening and learning, up and down, two-way communication throughout an organization. And it's more than two-way, it's multifaceted. The more people, the more organizations, the more groups you have, the more complicated a organization becomes. And if you don't have that multifaceted L, listening and learning, in place, then it could actually work to a detriment, even though your A and D, your approach and your deployment of the ADLI model, ADLI, is working very effectively. You could have a strong A, a strong D, but if you don't have that effective L and L, listening and learning, then it could be a detriment to your A and D, your approach and deployment.
Yeah, I'm flat out going to steal that, Laura, if you don't mind. I like the listening as an additional L for the listening and learning. And I also like the fact you talked about it working in the microcosm of that team, because it works in the microcosm of different teams. The approach, deployment, learning, and we're going to talk about integration, works just as well as the student trying to get the best grades out of college, as it does the technology team trying to improve the banking industry, as it does the volunteer team at the animal shelter trying to save lives of little kittens. Having a systematic approach, fully shared, with the listening, and I'm going to steal that word for every time I talk about this, and the learning really is important. But you brought up the complexity in the interrelationships, and that really is where the integration comes. If I was continuing to use the student example and I go to college and I lay out all of these systems for studying and I have my quiet time and I go all the way through college and I get straight A's and I graduate magna cum laude, did I succeed at college? And the answer is maybe not. Personally, my college experience was as much social as it was educational. It was multifaceted. It was wonderful. And there's where integration comes in. No matter what you're doing it in the context of other things that you are doing. To the extent that you can make your plans and your actions work together, weave in and out to accomplish a greater overarching goal, then we see some integration. So I might have my quiet time from 7 to 8 and then social hour from 8 to 9 at the bar downstairs. And that's all part of an evening plan. And that's part of an approach for my learning and approach for my social. But we weave them together, and my roommate goes with me downstairs, and I meet my study team downstairs, and I'm starting to weave in not just my getting straight A's, and I want to get my straight A's, and I want to graduate at the top of my class, but I'm weaving in my college experience of making contacts and making friends. Integration is the fact that the approaches we're going to talk about and that you're going to develop to make you very successful in life are never standalone. They first become aligned with other approaches and then become integrated. An example I kind of like to think about is one of my wife's goals is that we live in a neat house, so that typically the house is well kept. It doesn't have to be scrubbed every day, but when company comes over, we're glad to welcome them in and the house looks nice. And that extends to the yard, and that extends to my car. And I have systems of when I wash dishes and when I mop the floor, and she does her part, emptying the litter box because I'm allergic to litter. And I have systems of when we do stuff in the yard, and I have systems of when I wash the car. But it would be silly for me to wash the car at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and then mow the grass at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and suddenly get grass and dirt all over my car. So ADLI is having systematic and repeatable and regularly executed approaches shared with and assigned to everyone that's appropriate. And depending on the environment, that's where it is. Those approaches should be reviewed. The approaches themselves should be reviewed to see if they can be improved. And they need to weave in and out of your other approaches to accomplish that more overarching, higher goal, in my case, having a good college life, in the example that I've been using. That's ADLI. I say ADLI is attitude. I think ADLI is attitude. When you identify something that you want to succeed at, you want to succeed at not just the first time you try it, but you want to succeed at it systematically, continually. You need the ADLI approach. You need to start developing the approach. Once you have your approach laid out, you need to start sharing it and deploying it, and you need to start evaluating it, and you need to make sure it weaves in the others. That's ADLI. Now, the other part is, did that really work? And you measure what matters, what works. That's where LETCI comes in. So let me talk about that. And I'll use the student example, if that's all right, Laura, if that continues to work for you. First thing you do is you measure levels of performance. Now, I will say, for anybody that doesn't know, basically there's 4 things you can measure. You can measure how many of things there are, and you count them. You can measure how fast something happens, how well something happens, and how much it costs. There's really those 4 things that measure, and the measurements that really matter are always a ratio of those. How fast I'm going when I'm driving is miles per hour. How fast I'm going when I'm walking is hours per mile. And you'll identify those as you go along, as you're doing it. And obviously in the college example, level is what grade am I getting? Am I performing at a high level? And naturally you want to stop and review and see if I'm performing at a high level. So levels. And if you are running a company, is the company performing at a high level? If you are running a marathon, is your time at a high level? Levels. And trends. Is your time going up or down? And which way is good? That's one of the things that was really a game changer in the work environment when I started talking with my staff about when we report numbers, we're going to talk about levels, we're going to talk about trends, and we're going to label every graph which way is good. And some people didn't like that, but it is really, really meaningful. And it changes. So you need to stop and think about what you're measuring and which way it's going and which way is still good. For example, if you are a police department and you are trying to reduce crime, you may have a public relations push to get people to report crime. So which way is the crime stats going is good? Up. Because more people are reporting the crime. Once more people report the crime and then you can deal with the crime, then going down is good. But levels, trends, comparisons. If everyone else in the college is getting a C, that B looks pretty good. If everyone else in the college is getting an A, that B looks pretty bad. Comparisons are a way to make sure that level that you think is high is really high. See what other people are doing. Track what other people are doing. And if they have a giant breakthrough and suddenly are performing much better than you are, find out what happened.
Let's just break this down again. For ADLI, it was approach, deployment, listening, learning, and integration. That framed the ADLI for ADLI. For LETCI, we're talking about, as you mentioned, levels, trends, and comparisons. And I believe that you can have levels and trends, but without comparisons, those levels and trends are not meaningful. You need to take into context the comparative performance. For instance, going through COVID, I think would be a great analogy. We saw levels and trends, for instance, of building supplies or gas prices or whatever it might be, going all over the place. And it was the comparison to your competitors that really told you how well you were doing, because the world was shifting so quickly, so rapidly, given the pressures from the pandemic, that without those comparisons, you really wouldn't be able to get a good feel for your performance. So I think you're spot on. Comparisons is really the more meaningful component. Not to say levels and trends aren't important, but comparisons put it in perspective, in comparative view to the environment you're at that time working within.
Yeah, and they need to be current comparisons as well. The downside of being a boomer like I am is, I think, in terms of when I grew up, when I first started my professional life, a mortgage might be 14%. So someone tells me they got an 8% mortgage, I think they did great because my comparison is out of date. So current comparisons within your industry are great to know how you're doing within your industry, but really, when you can, compare yourself to the best of the best of the best. The people that listen to these podcasts are not the people that want to become the average citizen. They want to become the most productive person that they can be. So there's nothing wrong with comparing yourself to the best of the best. I am proud to say that the fleet management division from the police department, where I used to work, has now just been awarded as the best in the country. So if you have a fleet system, I can tell you who to compare it to, or time for vehicle repair. Always look for comparisons to make sure that you're in the right ballpark. That's the first thing. Make sure you're in the right ballpark. And the second thing is to find out what you can strive for and go for it. And if you are approaching the best of the best, or even find out that you are the best of the best, then celebrate. Celebrate should be one of the C's. We'll make celebrate. We've added learning. We're going to add celebrate then. Compare and celebrate. And then the I. The I is the integration. And it's the same thing as the integration I talked about before. It's how everything weaves together. With measurements, the integration is easier to see because often one thing that you measure is a leading indicator to another process. And it's an integrated measure. One of the industries I worked with was literally sewage treatment. And miles of sewer pipe that we inspected and cleaned directly related to the number of breaks and spills we would have in the city. The more miles we cleaned, the less breaks and spills. There are two different measurements of two different things, but they are integrated and related. So there's in-process measures and leading measures and lagging measures, output measures and outcome measures. And we're not going to talk about those in detail on this podcast, but those all lead to the integration of a system and a flow of things that happen. So that's ADLI, approach, deployment, learning, and integration. And then LETCI, how we interpret the results. What level you're performing at, LE, what is your trend, up, down, and which way should it be? How are you doing compared to the rest of the industry, to how your wife thinks you're doing if you're trying to be a good husband, or how your dorm is doing if you're comparing grades in a college. And then obviously what's the best of the best. And if 4.0 is the highest you can get, then 4.0 is the highest you can get. And that's one of your comparisons. And then integrations. One leads to the other, leads to the other. Results should tell a story. You should be able to read the story. And the story should be how well your approach that you fully deployed is working on achieving your not just direct goal, but your overall goal. With the example we use for the most part, your overall goal of having a great college life. All right, Laura, I'm turning it back to you because you have these brilliant ideas I want to hear.
One more point I think we should make is that LETCI is leveraged. It tells us how well we're doing with our approach, deployment, learning, and integration. So without LETCI, we can't effectively understand the improvements that we need to make to our ADLI. So ADLI and LETCI work together as two parts of a system. ADLI, approach, deployment, learning, integration, is the way that we go about structuring what we're doing and achieving our plan on a day-to-day executionary basis. Levels, trends, and comparisons tell us, okay, how well did we do and what we need to adjust in order to continue to do better. And that's the continuous cycle component of the Baldrige and the Sterling framework that we've been discussing. Now, you had mentioned one thing at the very beginning of the podcast, the plus G. Do you want to spend a minute explaining what the plus G to the LETCI means?
If you want to look at ADLI and LETCI as on a crossword puzzle, then the L in ADLI is the start of the L in LETCI, and that is where you're primarily using the measurement is in the learning. Then when you're reviewing your approach and you realize you didn't measure something that would tell you if it's working or not, now we're in the gap. If I put all of these systems in places to be a good husband and to keep my wife happy and never asked if she was happy, that's a glaring gap. What you're not doing is sometimes the hardest thing to identify. But if you have a regular cadence of evaluating your approach for effectiveness and realize, hey, I can't tell, that means there's something you could have measured that you didn't. And that's nothing wrong with that. Don't measure everything, measure what matters. And sometimes it's that review process that lets you know what matters.
Very good. Well, thank you for that, Gordon. Again, just to recap, ADLI stands for Approach, Deployment, Learning, Integration. I love the analogy you drew with the crossword puzzle. The L in the ADLI then becomes the jump-off point for the LETCI, which is the beginning of the continuous listening and learning cycle, because you're looking at your levels, trends, and comparisons to identify how you're doing. You also need to critically look at your ADLI and your LETCI to identify if there's any gaps that may exist. Maybe you're not measuring the right things, or there's a component of your approach or deployment that isn't being picked up appropriately in a level or trend comparison type manner. And so that would then frame a gap. Or a competitor starts doing something. For instance, we've started off this journey of AI and Gen AI. Maybe we need some approach deployment around AI and generative AI. And with that, we need to put levels, trends, and comparisons in place to see how well we're doing comparatively in the industry so that we stay abreast and current with our competitors. So I think you drew a very good model for us on ADLI, LETCI, the plus G, which is the gaps. And I loved your analogy of using college students, being a good husband, and keeping the house clean and all of that great stuff. Hopefully our listeners could relate to that. So thank you, Gordon, very much for your time. Appreciate this intro. We'll be visiting this topic again in the future. And I would like to invite our listeners to visit the sterlingcouncil.com website or to search for Sterling Council learning videos on YouTube if they do have a desire to learn more about ADLI, LETCI, or the Sterling and Baldrige frameworks. And I'd like, again, Gordon, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank our listeners for listening to the podcast.
My pleasure, Laura. And I also thank the listeners. It is something I love talking about.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Sterling Visionary Voices, Insights for Role Model Leadership from the Sterling Council. Discover more and connect with us at sterlingvisionaryvoices.com.